This week, we're going to talk about development before a child is born. So the issues of conception, hereditary and genetic issues, and prenatal development. Some of the things that we'll be talking about today are conception, genetics, and chromosomes, and then how our genetic makeup is influenced by our environment, which kind of plays into this idea of epigenetics. And then pregnancy and prenatal care and how these issues can be used within the pre-seed, pro-seed model. So I do want to apologize. I'm a little froggy today. I do have a cold. I'm actually recording this just a couple days before the week starts. But I actually heard a really interesting interview on the radio the other day about rising usage of marijuana among pregnant women. And so I actually wanted to add a bunch of slides to this that I hadn't covered before because I think it's a really interesting issue and it's something that we can relate to the PP model. And then also it's something that I thought we could have an interesting discussion about this week. So I do apologize. I'm a little bit creaky and kind of sound like a frog today. But I did want to talk about why we study children before they're even conceived. There we go. More and more studies are showing that there's an interrelatedness between the genetics and the environment. So the environment that a child is born into has major influences in addition to our genetic makeup. So we get genetic makeup from each sets of our family, from our mother and from our father equally. But then that is definitely affected by the pregnant woman's socioeconomic status, her family members, the race, ethnicity, and culture, and then access to quality prenatal care as well. And then we know that all of those factors definitely influence children after they're born, but now we're seeing that it can definitely affect children before they're born as well. I do want to just do some real fast biology 101, just so we know where we're kind of coming from when it talks about genetic and hereditary issues. So fertilization and conception is just really when a sperm and egg combine to create a zygote, which is a cell that starts out really small and then it becomes huge and it actually becomes all the cells that make up a newborn. And then when the newborn is born, they are growing and growing and growing until they are fully formed adult physically as well. So from our parents, from a male gamete and a female gamete, we are getting sexual reproduction that forms a zygote, and that is the genetic material that we get from our parents, which is also known as DNA. I promise this is the extent of the science that I'm giving to you because this is all I kind of get as well. But we do know that we have DNA strands. There are 46 of them. There are 46 pairs of chromosomes that we have within our DNA structure. It's just really, really long, but it makes up kind of the genetic material that is all of us. So a lot of it is our biological characteristics, like physical characteristics, like I get my brown hair, dark brown hair from my mom, I get my blue eyes from my dad, I get my lack of math skills from my mom, and I get my ability to catch colds a lot from my dad. But it also can shape our personality and intellect as well. So my math skills, I can definitely trace where I got that from. So when, and that's kind of always a fun thing, is to kind of look at old pictures of family members and see who you look like, who you didn't look like, where the nose got passed down from, that type of stuff. So that's our genetic makeup, things that we get from both sets of our parents. And we're kind of just looking at the genetic factors that are given to the unborn child from both of their biological parents. So Down syndrome, that's a chromosomal issue. So in that past slide, I was talking about DNA. So we have these pair of chromosomes, and in the 21st one, so on the left-hand side of the slide, you see that there should be just two where the 21 is, but where it's circled, there's 3. So this is extra chromosomal materials, which then alters the development of all domains for children with Down syndrome. We don't know specifically what causes Down syndrome, but we do know that advanced maternal age is a factor. So in your early 20s, I think the chance of you giving birth to a child with Down syndrome is like 1 in 450. But by the time you're in your late 40s, so 20, 25 years later, when you're young, it's 1 in thousands. But by the time you're in your 40s, it's like 1 in 450. That's your chance of giving birth to a child who has Down syndrome. Have those numbers flipped. So when you're young, it's a very, very rare chance. But by the time you're in your 40s, it's very, very high. So we don't know what causes it, but we know that the age of a woman's egg has something to do with it. A lot of the symptoms are quite noticeable. So there's definitely the noticeable facial features. They have the beautiful almond eyes. They have the flattened nasal bridges as well. You can typically out and about kind of see someone and be able to identify just from their facial features if they have Down syndrome. They also have low muscle tone. So if you took an infant and you just placed them on the ground, depending on their age, they might try rolling over. They could keep their knees up. They can kind of move their hands and bat at things or grab at things when they're placed on their backs, which is called prone, on the ground. But for some people who have low muscle tone, either from Down syndrome or not, if you place an infant on the ground, they kind of lay back like this. So their hands are kind of up, and it's hard to kind of get them off the ground. Their knees are not going to be up. They're just really floppy, and that's what it's kind of known as floppy baby. And that's low muscle tone. So I know a lot of you are looking into going into nursing, physical therapy, or occupational therapy. So muscle tone plays a lot into how we are able to develop physically. If you were actually to feel a child with low muscle tone, their calves, thighs, triceps, things like that, where you expect to feel muscle, it actually feels looser and floppier as well. And that's because of that low muscle tone, and that's in their physical domain, but it also affects how you can do a lot of different things. And that's why social services and education are so important. Early intervention, and we start at 6 weeks. So if you have a child who's born with Down syndrome, you can actually have early intervention in your home at six weeks old. You also have physical therapy and occupational therapy as well in order to make the outcomes for this child as good as possible, and to coach and support the parents. You really want to start early intervention as soon as possible. I'm sorry, that's going the wrong way. So that was one form of kind of genetic issues, but there's also this idea of just fully genetic transmission. So we don't know what the causes of Down syndrome are and why it affects the chromosomes, but some of our genetic transmission we do know. So tongue rolling, if you can go, you can roll it up like a taco. That's a dominant trait. Earlobe, if they're free or attached, mine are free. But one of my twins has attached and one of them has free. The pinky shape, how you fold your arms like this, which way you do it is also a genetic trait. Cheek dimples, cleft chin, how your thumb is, your toe length. I have a significant widow's peak, and I get that from my dad's side. So all of these things are dominant and recessive, and they are part of our genetic. Here is a very poor iPhone picture of my daughters, but I wanted, because they are twins, they are a really good example of dominant and recessive traits. So I have the one on the left has a smooth chin, and the one on the right has a cleft chin. And so the cleft chin is dominant and the smooth chin is recessive. I have a smooth chin. My husband has a cleft chin, and so does my father-in-law. So one twin got the dominant gene for cleft chin, and one twin got the recessive gene for smooth chin. So that's kind of how our genetic makeup can be affected by either dominant or recessive traits. I also have a better picture of my twins, and I talk a lot about twins because they are a really good way for us to see if something is genetic or not, or it's a way that we can use. So twins are often used in studies. So my twins are fraternal, so they're dizygotic. So there was 2 eggs, 2 sperm, and they're just basically genetically sisters that were raised in the same womb. They share as much genetic material as you do with the sibling that you might have. Then there's monozygotic twins, and that's an egg, and then a sperm, and then it splits after it's been fertilized. There are a couple subtle differences or subcategories within the identical and fraternal twins, but that's less important. What we're really looking for is that identical twins are much more genetically similar than fraternal twins, because they're monozygotic and they started as the one egg that was fertilized and then split. We have a lot more information about if things can be attributed to genetics or if they can be attributed to environment. So researchers study both sets of twins, because if an identical twin is more alike than in a trait like math ability or soccer ability than a fraternal twin set, then heredity might come into play. So that's kind of how why researchers want twins. And as soon as my twins were born in 2011, I think they were 6 weeks old, and I received a letter from UCSD asking me if I wanted to enroll them in some twin studies. Me, being the child development person that I am, I was really, really excited about this because I wanted to learn more about child development, and I thought it was really, really fascinating. So they've done perception studies with their eyes when they were very young, infants, 3 and 4 months old. They've done social and emotional tests, all different types of tests, because they are fraternal twins. So when they're looking at if it's genetic or not, they're looking at identical twins and then fraternal twins as well. So how can twin studies be used in the pre-seed proceed model? And once again, we're really looking at that pre-seed part. So that's what this image that I have up is about. So my really fancy arrow graphics thing is that twin studies can be used in phase 2 of the pre-seed section of the model. So that's the epidemiological assessment. So genetics, behavior, and environment. Twin studies can be, is it genetics, is it behavior and environment? How does that impact health, and how can that ultimately help our outcomes, which is our quality of life? But when it does come to testing and things like that, so we know that we're getting genetic makeup and chromosomal makeup from our parents. So we want to identify any kind of genetic or chromosomal disorders so that we can provide early intervention and education as soon as possible. So I gave birth to my youngest daughter a 1.5 years ago, and I decided that I was going to deliver at Scripps Sanitas, which has just a level 1 NICU. So I did choose to do a lot of ultrasounds, blood works, first trimester screening. I did all the second trimester screening as well. I did glucose, all the testing like that, because if there was an issue, I did want to know about it so that I could transfer to Tri-City or Scripps Mary Birch, things like that that have a higher NICU, so that they have a better ability to take care of children who might be critically ill. And through these screenings and these ultrasounds, I was able to determine if my child was going to need that when she was born or if she didn't. She didn't have trisomy 18, which is or any kind of Down syndrome, which is trisomy 21, or any neural tube defects, which would be neural, why am I blanking on it? It'll come to me. But any abnormalities, any amniotic fluid levels, anything like that would mean that I would transfer to a different hospital in order to give birth. So I think that's why this is so important, is that we can make sure that the child is getting the adequate medical care that they need before they're born, at the moment that they're born, and then after they're born, so that they have the optimal physical, emotional, cognitive development over their entire lifespan, which starts even before they're born. So epigenetics. So we have this kind of genetic material that we get from both sets of our parents, and we're looking at it from this idea of above genetics. So the study of epigenesis is turning on or off genes that determine the functions of cells. So we are learning more and more that we can take our genetic makeup and we can change it through hopefully positive changes throughout our lifespan. So there's an example, and the next the next slide has a video, but they talk about this kind of rat study where they took rats, and the sign of a good rat mama is that she licks you a lot. So they actually took rats from different family groups and they switched them. And then they also made sure that they had mamas that licked a lot and mamas that didn't lick a lot. And they were able to kind of study the genetics. If you watch the video, you'll kind of see that rats who might have come with a low licking mama as their genetic material, when they were with the high licking mama, they became high lickers themselves. So she actually changed their genetics by providing really positive early experiences for this little rat baby. So what we're really hoping is that we can break the cycle of abuse and poverty and things like that by having really quality environment and early experiences in order to change our genetic makeup. So for example, me, I have really poor math skills, but through practice, actually not when I was young, I had incredible math anxiety. It was really, really difficult for me. But actually in my 30s, by going back and doing math classes and learning more from family members, I have actually become much more proficient at math. So that's a way that early experiences and things like that are hopefully changing my genetic makeup, so then I can pass that down onto my own children. But once again, I have some really good graphics for you. You can see where I've just really awesomely circled areas that the pre-seed proceed model can affect our genetics. So social interactions, diet, exposure to chemicals like smoking or alcohol, especially with drugs and abuse. We're seeing fentanyl, opioids, things like that are being used a lot more prenatally as well, and then exercise. So that's all areas where the pre-seed proceed model has been identified to help with well-being and outcomes, and that's an area where we can also see it change our genetic structure as well. So this is the video. I'm going to see if it will play for us today. Nope, sorry. But this is the video. So this is epigenetics. It's called Nature versus Nurture. It's about a 4-minute long video. And it goes into kind of the study of nurture and the study of nature and how they can kind of be combined with this new study of epigenetics. Then I want to kind of segue into pregnancy and prenatal development, and we'll talk about the pre-seed proceed model with that as well. So why should we even care how children develop before they're born? We've talked about this before, but prenatal medical care and the experiences that mothers or women have while pregnant can affect the development of the fetus. So we really want to set children up for success for their entire lifespan by providing quality medical care and safe environments for women who are pregnant. So the stages of pregnancy, real fast, once again, Biology 101. This is the germinal phase. So this is when there's really fast growth from just a tiny little fertilized egg all the way into a blastocyst, which is then what's going to be the embryo, the placenta, the amniotic sac, and the umbilical cord. And this all happens within like a day, like 24 hours. It's really crazy how fast it goes and how small it is on what microscopic level it is. So at this point, it could possibly get implanted into the uterine wall. Or it wouldn't, and it would lead to menstruation. So really only 10 to 15% of fertilized eggs implant. And then of those ones that implant, only 75% of them lead to pregnancies that are carried past 20 weeks. So it is somewhat of a miracle that some of us get pregnant because our chances of it each month can be quite low, or the chances of having a successful pregnancy can be quite low. So then this is the embryonic stage. This is 2 to 8 weeks. So about the time when you're finding out that you're pregnant, they're tiny little, they're small. They're like actually like that big. So a lot of times they'll be like, oh, I'm showing. You're really not showing at that point. It's probably some bloating, or if you're feeling really sick and nauseous, you're eating a lot more. But something that small is probably not changing your uterine wall at that point very much. But this is how small it is. And this is really from 2 weeks to 8 weeks pregnant. And this is when there's a huge change in all the organs in the body system as well. And then here's our fetal growth from 8 weeks all the way to 40 weeks. So we're starting at that line, and that's the fetus. So it goes from an embryo to a fetus at 12 weeks, and then the fetus grows until about 40 weeks gestation. Their bones still start forming. You're growing bones. You're growing all of the body systems, organs, eyelashes, hair, all that type of stuff you're growing. As somebody who's had 2 successful pregnancies and 1 miscarriage, I've been through this before, and it's quite amazing that you can start off with something so small that gets to be this kind of newborn just from a couple of cells. It's really kind of a crazy complex process. But fetuses do have behaviors even when they are born. They kick, they breathe, they suck their thumb, they turn, they squint, they swallow, they hiccup. So this is an active little one in utero. So kind of moving their arms, moving their body. I'd say it's probably a 12 to 16 week fetus right there. So that you can see the profile of the child as they're kind of turned away from you. They're kicking, they're turning, they suck their thumb. All those types of things happen when they're born, and that's their behavior. Then there's types of growth. So there's proximal, and we'll talk about this throughout child development. But proximal is out from center, and then the cephalocaudal is head to toe. So really kind of what we see this in infancy is that they get this huge like beer gut, big tummy, like they're out, they're big. and then all of a sudden they don't fit into their clothes anymore because they've just shot up and they've done this head to tail growth. So that's kind of how it always is, and you definitely see it in infants and toddlers because they get rolls everywhere. They get a beer gut, not a beer gut because they're babies, but they get the big old tummy, and then suddenly they shoot up and you've got to go buy them some new clothes. So then our environment during the prenatal period. And this is where we are probably wanting to look at it through the pre-seed, post-seed model. And how can we affect healthy pregnancy outcomes for women by looking at their environment? So we know that severe stress can affect the development of the child, and specifically social and emotional delays in the child, and even some physical differences like a cleft palate. And what I mean by severe stress is not like I had a bad day or I'm a little bummed today. But, you know, a couple months ago, there was a big human rights crisis in Myanmar where some Muslims were being bombed and hurt and killed in parts of Myanmar, and they were having to escape to another country. That's what I mean by severe stress, is threat of death, having to leave unnecessarily from your home. Those types of things are really severe stress. Not that, you know, I'm a little upset today. That's not going to hurt your baby. That's a normal human experience. And a lot of times my friends or people that I know who know that I kind of specialize in child development will call me up because they just want everything to be perfect with 9 or 10 months that they're pregnant, and that's not possible. You know, for that long enough of a period, we're going to have bad days, and that's okay. That's not going to affect your child terribly. But if you were living in extreme grinding poverty, you weren't getting enough food, you didn't have access to prenatal care, those types of things could negatively affect a child. We do know that drugs, alcohol, and smoking, especially marijuana and tobacco, can affect the child as well. You do want to limit caffeine. I think 2 to 3 cups is, I think it's 350 milligrams is totally okay. I drank coffee throughout my pregnancies because you are quite tired, but anything really, really excessive, you know, like you're having 4 or 5 shots of espresso, you probably want to cut back on because it can affect the behavior of the fetus and how they grow. And then you really need to make sure that you're managing pre-existing conditions. And this is where another area where I feel like our pre-seed, proceed model could identify people who have diabetes or even are getting gestational diabetes from the pregnancy. And we could affect healthy pregnancy outcomes for both mother and child by helping them kind of manage pre-existing conditions, either by counseling before they get pregnant or when they're pregnant through like dietitians and things like that. And then common infections, and that's why we have so many lists of things that you should probably avoid, is like toxoplasmosis is from scooping out the kitty litter. You know, give that to a neighbor or a friend or your husband or something like that. The rates of people actually getting sick and dying from this are incredibly low. I want to say like 1 or 2 a year in the United States. But if we can just tell all pregnant women to avoid it, then we won't even have those few deaths. And that's the same with like listeria from eating soft serve ice cream. You're probably not going to get it. But if we can have people avoid it because you don't really need to eat soft serve ice cream for 9 or 10 months that you're pregnant, then we can kind of manage those few deaths that might happen or illnesses that might happen. And then rubella, which is measles, that's why immunizations and vaccinations are so important, is because it can be quite devastating for the fetus to be exposed to this. All right, so this is kind of where I got the impetus to re-record this video this week right before it went live. Is I was driving, you know, I'm a middle-aged mom, I was listening to NPR, and they were talking about there are rising amounts of women who are choosing to smoke marijuana while pregnant. And in California, it is now legal to recreationally use marijuana in some situations. Like, I know you can't go light up a joint on Camp Pendleton and stuff like that. But in other places where we have kind of a gray area of buying it, selling it, growing it, kind of, we have laws, but nobody's really quite sure. But we do know that pregnant women shouldn't smoke marijuana. You shouldn't smoke tobacco. You shouldn't smoke marijuana. You shouldn't get drunk. You shouldn't use hard drugs. You shouldn't drink a lot of coffee. You shouldn't take aspirin. You should. There's a lot of different things that you should and could not do. So this isn't to debate marijuana among unpregnant people. That's up to you. It's legal. I don't care about your personal lives. This is that we know that pregnant women shouldn't do it. So there's a lot of things that you shouldn't do. and one of them is marijuana. So in 2016, 22% of kind of younger mothers tested positive for using marijuana, and then 19% of women between the ages of 18 and 24 did. So this was from the New York Times, this article that I'm sourcing, and I will talk a little bit about it, but they looked at 6-year-olds who were born to mothers who had smoked 1 joint or more daily in the first trimester, showed a decreased ability to understand concepts in listening and reading. And then at age 10, children exposed to THC, that's kind of the active part of the drug. So apparently you can distill it, and that's why you can have like hemp oils that you can digest, or like the hemp seed. I think that's what makes our moisturizer and stuff like that. But the THC is like the actual drug part in you. So children who were exposed to that, either by eating it or by smoking it in utero, were more impulsive than other children and less able to focus their attention. And that in this interview that I was listening to, it said that 10% of THC actually crosses the placenta and the child is exposed to it. So once again, when we're looking at alcohol or hard drugs or smoking marijuana and tobacco, the more you use and the bigger volume amounts that you use, that's what affects the child more negatively. So if you are a hardcore alcoholic who is drinking every day and drinking multiple drinks per day, that's why you're probably going to have a child with fetal alcohol syndrome. And same with here. If 10% of what you smoke is going to the child, if you're smoking every day and they're getting 10% of that, or you're smoking large volumes at a time, 10% of that larger volume is also going to be passed to the child. So that's why we're looking at them using it heavily in the first trimester, had lower scores in reading, math, and spelling at age 14 when compared to their peers. And then actually looking at the brain of fetuses, either through testing or if they do pass away. So these are very young fetuses at half their gestation. When they were exposed to maternal marijuana use, the male fetuses, they noticed that there was abnormal function of the amygdala, which is the part of the brain that regulates emotion. So we're really seeing that there's a lot of impulsivity issues and attention issues related to that amygdala when there is significant marijuana use by a pregnant woman. It's already well documented that the developing brains of teenagers can be altered by regular, chronic, high marijuana use, and it actually will eventually reduce your IQ, and it can actually change the part of your structure if you're engaged in like chronic high use marijuana. So if you're somebody who's like perma-stoned all the time, it actually can change your brain structure. And for our teens who are growing their brains, it can have bad effects on it as well. So kind of what I wanted to talk about, and this is the first time I've ever done this, so we'll see how the discussion board goes this week, is I want to have kind of a true discussion. So you don't need to come with an idea of a social model that you want to implement, but I just kind of want to talk about the fact that marijuana use among young women is in California is much higher than the national average, and it's rising. A lot of these women who are using it tend to underreport their marijuana use, or they don't report it at all, leading to prenatal care not being tailored to those issues. So you can be addicted to it, but if you're not telling anybody, then you can't go ahead and get help. So how can we use kind of the pre-seed, proceed model, specifically that pre-seed phase, to examine this social issue? Because like I said, it's a very large issue. It just became legal. We don't really know all of these social ramifications. We don't know all of the legal gray areas when it comes to women who are pregnant, and then kind of prenatal use. So I'm hoping to have kind of a free-form discussion about this topic, and these were some of the things that I was kind of brainstorming myself. So phase 1, when we're looking at social assessment, that's quality of life and outcome. So what kind of will we think about this? That women report it higher, so that they're telling us that they're using it, so we can go ahead and help them abstain for the time that they're pregnant, or if they decide to nurse, or do we want them to stop completely? You know, what kind of would be the quality of life or outcome that we're looking at? Then phase 2, what would be the epidemiological assessment? So what's the health issue? Is there a benefit for usage to pregnant women? Do they think that there's a perceived benefit? Like if you really have terrible morning sickness, does smoking a joint in the morning allow you to keep down food? So do women think that there's a benefit to it? And is there really strong enough evidence to caution against use? Is it something like fetal alcohol syndrome, where we know that no level of alcohol is safe while you're pregnant? You know, a lot of times in other countries, people say that, you know, a glass of wine here or there. I really take the hard stance that if you can't give up your nightly glass of wine for the 9 or 10 months that you're pregnant, then you probably have an issue, and you're going to want to go kind of get some help in working on that kind of thing. We don't know what the level is. We don't know that half a glass is fine and a glass and a half is wrong, is going to affect the child. So we don't know that. So that's why it's across the board. Just don't do it. And then phase 3, behavioral assessment. Why do women underreport? Are they afraid? Legally, are they afraid, even though it's now legal? Are they afraid as a pregnant woman that they could be have some court case against them for child abuse? Do they think that it's not a problem? It's not going to affect the child? So why are women not reporting that they're using marijuana? And then phase 4, educational ecological assessments. Do these women know that there are fetal effects? Is it just kind of something that we've learned about marijuana? Oh, it's natural, it's from the earth, it's not going to hurt you. Well, lots of things are natural on the earth and they can hurt you. You know, you could go outside. There's a plant that produces arsenic. If you ate too much of it, you can kill yourself, and it grows out of the ground. It's just as natural. And I don't have anything wrong. I don't have any judgments about people who are not pregnant smoking marijuana. I do have judgments about people who are pregnant who don't stop once they learn. And then phase 5 is our administrative and policy assessments. So are there clear-cut laws about pregnant women and smoking? I actually couldn't find any. If you have a better resource, if you have somebody that you know who's in law enforcement or is taking a class about law enforcement who can inform us better, that would be awesome. Or is the CDC telling us anything? Is the American Academy of Pediatrics telling us anything about these types of things? What is our policy and regulations about this? So that's just kind of my ideas. I'm hoping that we can, you don't have to come with a clear-cut idea. I just thought that maybe we could learn from each other, and we could use this pre-seed, proceed model in order to look at pregnancy outcomes and then the rising use of marijuana. So something else that affects pregnancy and is alcohol. So alcohol is obviously legal, but it is much more socially taboo for a person to be drinking while pregnant, because we know that no alcohol is safe in pregnancy. Like I said before, it's just that we don't know what the quantity is. We know that a lot of quantity over a long period is definitely going to lead to fetal alcohol, but we don't really know. We don't know that it's 350 grams. We don't know if it's a liter, that type of stuff. So across the board, don't drink while you're pregnant, because it can lead to lower cognitive ability. An earlier life expectancy, so you'll pass away earlier in your lifespan, and then a higher incident of incarceration. I actually know this on a personal level. My husband's aunt and uncle are one of those people who have like 20 kids. So they had 4 of their own, and then they have foster or adopted. I think they're like 16 now, and then they have 3 kids that are like in their late adolescence who they're just guardians of. So they have this amazing heart, and they love to foster and adopt. They had a child that they adopted about 20 years ago, and he's no longer with us. He had fetal alcohol. He lived with them all of his life. They adopted him later in his life. He never graduated from high school. He worked as a checker with, the support of one of those groups that helps people with special needs kind of try to have employment. And then he actually got hit by a car. He looked the wrong way in a street in Oregon, and he got hit and he passed away. So I have personal experience with it, and I've worked with a lot of these children. When we're talking about kind of brain issues, so what this picture is that it's kind of where we are being affected by it. So the cerebral cortex, which is kind of the outer layer, and it should be bumpy and ridged. It can be smooth for people with fetal alcohol, and that definitely affects your IQ and your ability to learn and stuff like that. You want ridges, and the less ridges there are, or the smaller the brain is, that leads to more cognitive issues. It's very similar to the Zika virus and how that affects the brain of children. And then the hippocampus, which is kind of that thing in the middle, and that is your memory ability. And so we see short-term and long-term memory issues. And so that is a really big issue. And I've seen that personally in a preschool classroom where we had a child with fetal alcohol. Mom had 4 children, 3 of them had fetal alcohol. She was a lifelong alcoholic from about age 12 or 13. And as she drank with 3 of her, probably 4 of them, but 3 of them that she reported, and 3 of them had fetal alcohol. So this child was potty training. He was very much regulated by adults. So we told him when to go. There had a timer every 30 minutes, go put him on the potty. He would pee, but he never was able to wash his hands independently, successfully. It was something that his memory just wouldn't allow him to do. He most of the time he would turn the water on, he would do soap, he would play in the water for a while, and he would just walk away. It was like that last step, he was never going to be able to put it together, those 3 steps to turn the water off. One time he put a lot of, he was drying his hands and he just threw the paper towel in the bottom of the sink and the water just started overflowing because it was blocked and he hadn't turned it off. So that's an example that I've seen as well. And then the cerebellum, which is kind of in that back there, that's our motor ability and muscular ability. So all areas, but especially our social emotional issues, are definitely affected by fetal alcohol. And that's why we kind of have broad regulations of don't drink when you're pregnant. It's not good for your child's brain. And this is something where else we could see pre-seed, post-seed model. What would be our outcome? And we want women to report so that we can go ahead and get them support. We want them to stop drinking completely. We want them to enter rehab. You know, what is the outcome that we want? And how can we look at behavior issues, genetics issues, environmental issues in order to have better outcomes for these children so that they don't have these brain disorders as they grow up. So prenatal care plays a lot into this. So the more we can get women to access prenatal care and have quality access themselves, because it's really expensive. It's thousands and thousands of dollars to do this because they're quite sophisticated blood tests, hearing screenings, glucose tests. I mean, there's a lot that goes into prenatal care and it's quite expensive. So allowing all women to have access to that would also be another issue that we could look at with the pre-seed models, that we all have access to healthcare. But really, it's a system to monitor prenatal development. So the American Academy of Pediatrics has a systematic way that they want prenatal care to be used by all practitioners in the United States, so that it's equal for everybody. And then our well child. So once a child's born at 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, what kind of testing are they engaging in, either social, emotional, or physical, in order to make sure that they have optimal physical health. So that they're able to grow up as healthy as possible. So we have all different kinds of ultrasounds, monitoring, blood pressure, and then interviews and assessments. And that really would come into play with marijuana, hard use, and alcohol. Use is these assessments and interviews, but it really depends on people's ability to self-report as well. And I think that's where the pre-seed, post-seed model would really come into play. And then we really just need early and consistent prenatal development. So you're typically going when you're 8 weeks pregnant, so you've just found out, you've missed a period, you call, you go in for an appointment, we make sure that the embryo has, the embryo has implanted where it's supposed to, you're gonna have a healthy pregnancy, get you started on your prenatal vitamins, that have folic acid to work on those neural tube defects. Spina bifida was the thing that I was thinking about many slides ago. That's a neural tube defect, is spina bifida, where you'll have a hole in your spine. So we just really want to make sure that this prenatal care is early and it's consistent, so that we can identify risk and complications either to the mother, like gestational diabetes or preeclampsia, and that would also affect the child as well. So we can educate them as well with like kick counts or referral to other services. So a big indicator of a child or a fetus is in distress is kick counts. So if they start to go down, if you're not feeling your child kick as much and you have a certain time of day when you're always kind of aware of that, and that's what the kick counts are supposed to do, then you can notify your obstetrician and they could do some further testing and then have the child be delivered if at all possible. I've had a couple of personal friends who have gone through stillbirths. It's a devastating thing to carry a child for many, many months and then have them die in utero or right soon after birth or while they're being born. And so one of my friends, she's just a huge proponent of the kick counts. She was a very young mother, and I think she's just blaming herself, which I think a lot of mothers do, and I don't think that she could have done anything to prevent it, but she always kind of said that she wished she had paid attention to the behavior of the child at the very, very late stages of pregnancy and do her kick counts more regularly, because she thinks she would have identified the problem. I'm not sure if that's so, but while I was pregnant with both of my pregnancies that went to term, she would text me regularly to make sure that I was doing them, which I really appreciated, that she was looking out for me and my little babies. But screening is just so, so important so that we can make sure that there are healthy pregnancy outcomes for all women. So prenatal care and this pre-seed, proceed model. So I've linked with the paper, and it's additional reading for this week, and it's from a Milwaukee public health program, and they're working on the disparities in pregnancy outcomes, specifically race and age. So they're looking at African-American women who unfortunately have the highest rate of infant death, so soon after the child is born, passing away, or then in utero death, like a late-term miscarriage or stillbirth, and then they have quite poor outcomes as well themselves as pregnant women. Recently in the news was Serena Williams and her little one. She actually went through a complication, and now she's a huge Black mother advocate for making sure that we know our own health, and we're advocating for ourselves in order that all races have equal access to pregnancy care, prenatal care, and then after birth care, in order to make sure that these disparities kind of disappear. But I really like this paper. It's very wonky. It's very much tailored towards public health, but I think by looking through it and reading through it and kind of glancing at it, you could get some ideas specifically about phase 1, which is the social assessment. So kind of what Milwaukee is doing is that they know that childhood experiences and genetic predisposition, so what we've talked about all of these slides, the genetic predisposition, the genetic makeup that we inherit, and then also the experience of the mother while pregnant and their early childhood experiences definitely affect this phase. So they're focusing on their community to be served, which is young African-American mothers, more specifically adolescent African-American pregnant women. So there is a negative birth outcome rate, and it's excessively higher in the African-American community, especially a young women. So that's what they're looking for. That's their outcome, is that they want that to change. So the goal, the desired outcome, because that's what that phase 1 is to increase prenatal care utilization in the first 3 months among African-American adolescents in the city of Milwaukee. So this is an example of, you can look at an outcome, you want to change the disparity in pregnancy outcomes, and one way to do that after looking at all the different phases is to increase prenatal care utilization. That's the thing I talked about, so everybody should have equal access to health care. So in conclusion, how we kind of use the genetic makeup that we've been given to us by our parents is affected by the environment that we grow up in and that our mother is exposed to while she is pregnant with us. The pre-seed, proceed model then uses evidence from twin studies to examine the role of genetics and environment. Is it a genetic issue, or is it an environment and behavior issue? And then the pre-seed, proceed model can also be used to look at disparities in prenatal care or rising incidences in drug use among pregnant women. There's lots of different issues that the pre-seed, proceed model can look at when we're looking at a child before they're even born. So go ahead and go back online. We've got the discussion board about marijuana. I've got kind of 2 additional readings. One will be for our article reflection, and then the other one will be this Milwaukee study that talks more about racial disparities with prenatal care. And then you've got the article reflection. So that's kind of what we're working on this week. Have a great week, guys. Bye.